Breaking this week, we're looking back to when there was a new owner for the Bills, a deadly airline crash, and a president who came to Buffalo. It all made news this very week in decades past. Dave McKinley recalls when those stories and more were all news to you.
Would you believe it was 10 years ago this week that Terry Pegula plunked down what was then a record $1.4 billion bid to purchase the Buffalo Bills? Amid relief with the apparent assurance the team would stay in Western New York, talk ramped up about a new stadium. Here's the tune Erie County Executive Mark Poloncarz was singing about that at the time.
I'm not going to cut libraries. I'm not going to close parks. I'm not going to reduce child protective services just to give multi-billionaires additional cash in their pockets.
10 years later, a new stadium is being built with a record amount of taxpayer dollars being used to construct it. 20 years ago this week, as the latest crop of American idols, including Western New York's John Stevens, wowed a delighted crowd at HSBC Arena, a federal ban on so-called assault weapons passed 10 years prior reached its sunset, and in the 20 years since, Congress has not replaced that bill, which was allowed to expire this week in 2004. 30 years ago this week, one of the most remarkable political comebacks of all time.
Get over it. I'm the best person for Washington.
This week's News to You pop quiz: who was this former Washington, D.C. mayor who, despite being caught in an FBI sting, smoking crack and going to prison, came back to win the Democratic primary on his way to becoming mayor once again, proving you can be convicted of felonies and still be elected this week in 1994. Remember, this was back when you could still get 5 pounds of chicken legs for just $2.99 or shop at Pleasures and Pastimes when the transformation of the former Trico plant on Main Street into the Tri-Main Center was just underway. It was also when U.S. Air Flight 427 bound from Chicago crashed just short of a runway in Pittsburgh. 2 women from Chautauqua County were among the 132 souls lost in the disaster this week in 1994. 40 years ago this week, our 40th president, Ronald Reagan, came to Buffalo as he campaigned for re-election back when New York was still considered a battleground state. During speeches while dedicating the Santa Maria Towers, he panned his Democratic opponent Walter Mondale's plan to raise taxes.
The Democratic candidate contends that working Americans wouldn't be hurt by his tax increases. That's a fairy tale.
And again at a luncheon at Duville College.
Well, I think the only bills that we want to see go higher are your Buffalo bills, not your tax bills.
Reagan would win in one of the biggest landslides in history, which would also mark the last time a Republican carried New York in a presidential race. During his visit, there was one notable Democrat by his side, Buffalo Mayor Jimmy Griffin, who explained why he welcomed the president to the Queen City.
He's the president of all of us.
This was long before the term "not my president" became fashionable, in a time remarkably different, wasn't it, though? Back in the days when this was all news to you?
And here's the answer to this week's News to You pop quiz. It was Marion Barry who pulled off the improbable political comeback 30 years ago this week. He won the Democratic primary to become mayor again in Washington. After his first term ended in scandal, he was caught smoking crack in an FBI sting operation, sent to prison. Barry, by the way, died in 2014 at the age of 78. 6:46.